Welcome. For those of you returning, thanks for coming back. For those of you who are joining us and haven't been part of the speaker series this fall, thanks for coming. See some faces, some photographs, and some names on there that maybe weren't here last time. And once again, I want to express my appreciation to Professor Fabian Darling-Wolf for allowing us to hold this as one of the speaker series events within the graduate colloquium. I think this particular talk is going to resonate especially well with the students in the colloquium, even though you're first year students, but it'll start to plant a seed and start making you think about the ways in which you can sort of look at a dissertation and a dissertation writing process and already be anticipating how it might turn into a book. And with that, let me tell you a little bit about today's lecture. We have it listed as a lecture, but I think it's more of a sort of a workshop information session about how to think about these things, which is entitled From Dissertation to Book, Strategies and Best Practices. We are very, very fortunate to be joined here by Mary Rose Muccie, who is the director of Temple University Press and Scholarly Communications Officer for Temple Libraries. We also, if you saw the promotional material, Aaron Javsicas was supposed to be joining us as well. He is the editor-in-chief of Temple University Press, but he had something that came up in the last minute. But in any case, Mary Rose is ready to go, and she's done this many times and is a true professional and has some wonderful things to share with us about this lecture. What are the most common pitfalls when going from dissertation to book? How should you identify and approach a publisher? How has COVID-19 impacted scholarly publishing? Mary Rose Muccie from the Temple University Press will answer and provide tips for publishing with the scholarly press. We have, as you know, the wonderful Temple University Press here right on campus. I'm actually one of the board members, and it's really a wonderful thing to watch the process and see how rigorous it is and how thoughtful it is. We will get advice on how to write a compelling book proposal, how to approach a publisher, how to avoid common first book mistakes, and more. A little bit about Mary Rose. She has worked in the scholarly publishing for over 30 years and has been the director of Temple University Press and Scholarly Communications Officer for Temple Libraries since June 2014. Her experience includes serving as a founding director of the JSTOR Current Scholarship Program, director of Project Muse, and publisher at the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. At Temple, she oversees the press's publishing program, which produces 45 to 50 books annually, along with 2 journals, and helped launch robust open access publishing services within the library. So with that introduction, please let's welcome Mary Rose Muccie.
Thank you, Patrick. I am thrilled to be here. I am going to share my screen now, and we will start. Yes, I'm also playing the role of Aaron today, and I think we have some interesting things to share, and I think it's going to be fun. So a little bit about the press. So the Temple University Press was founded in 1969, so we celebrated our 50th anniversary recently. We have about 1,400 books in print. We also publish 2 journals. We've long been known as a publisher focused on social justice and on marginalized communities. Ethnic studies, women's studies, LGBTQ studies are real cornerstones of our list. You can see just some examples of books that we've published recently that I think speak to the current moment in a particularly important way. And some of these were published a while ago, so this has been part of our history. We also have 2 book series that started fairly recently, a series in Black male studies and a series in critical race and indigeneity. again, really looking to attract and publish books that are especially relevant in these challenging times. So you finished your dissertation and you're breathing a great sigh of relief and feeling very accomplished, and you should. But what's next? So you have to decide if you want to publish a series of articles, if you want to do some sort of digital project, or if you want to take your dissertation and turn it into a book. And university presses and scholarly publishers do all of those things. And so you do have a lot of options. Today, though, we're going to focus on turning your dissertation into a book. So the academic publishing landscape writ large can be segmented in a couple of different ways. And this is just a sort of a loose description of the options that you have. So we can start with the big commercial textbook publishers, your Pearsons, your McGraw-Hills, and so on. And they focus primarily on textbooks and other pedagogical products, both in print and in online, and I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of their products, although they almost exclusively focus on those high enrollment undergrad courses. And there's been a lot of conversation recently about textbook affordability. Temple actually is focusing on this in a kind of structured way because these products tend to be fairly expensive. They generate the most revenue in the textbook industry for sure. And they're probably the least relevant here. These are commercial products. They tend to be written by senior scholars, and they go into subsequent edition fairly frequently. Again, they're focused on high enrollment undergrad classes. You have your smaller commercial academic presses, Routledge, Palgrave, Rowman and Littlefield. And they are different from university presses in, I think, one major way. They do publish scholarly titles. They publish first books, but they're more likely to publish more narrow, single topic academic monographs, and they're intended primarily for sale to academic libraries. This is what their business model is based on, academic library sales, and they're set up to do those fairly well. Larger university presses, you see Oxford and Cambridge, they're usually the ones that are thought of first. It also includes a number of presses from the Ivies, Princeton, Yale, and also university presses like Chicago, like Hopkins, like Princeton. I said Princeton. And these are the larger university presses. They're a bit of a hybrid. They publish scholarly monographs. They publish course books, but they also publish what is often called academic trade. These are general interest trade titles that have somewhat of an academic underpinning. They're publishing titles that you would typically find in a Barnes and Noble. And then I think the largest group are the smaller university presses. They are distinguished, I think, by the profile of the books published. For the most part, and certainly for Temple, we've moved away from the more narrow academic monographs that are primarily published for libraries. These monographs, they tend to be cloth only and slightly more higher priced. We're looking for scholarly work that's readable, something that expands on the topic, and primarily we publish books for use in upper level undergrad and graduate courses. We are looking for books that are more readable, they're less narrow scholarship, and we look at this less about finding the right business models and more about the type of book. And as I said, primarily we publish course books. We do have a relatively large list at Temple, though, of books on Philadelphia and the region. We're not going to talk about those today, but that is an important segment of our list. We are mission-driven, though. We do publish academic monographs. We just don't publish them in the volume that a Routledge might, but that is part of our mission. We do publish books by scholars for scholars, but the majority of our list is made up of course books. So you've got this pantheon of publishers to choose from. So, how do you find the right one for your work? It's important to narrow down your list. Don't blast out inquiries to a lot of publishers. We're going to talk about creating a proposal later, but you want to send that to the right group of publishers. You could start by looking at your own work and at your own bookshelves. You'll probably see a number of publishers that appear in your citations and some of the same logos that appear over and over on the spines on your bookshelves. That's a great indication that your scholarship and your approach is probably appropriate for their lists. You also want to talk to people about their publishing experiences. I think this is important to do, and something that I'm not sure a lot of junior scholars do, but talk to people in your discipline. Talk to your mentors. What were their experiences like when they published their book? Yours are likely to be similar, with the way, ask about the attention they got. Ask about how the production process went, the peer review process. I think these are important conversations to have. You also need to take into account if your tenure committee has any preferences. Some tenure committees have ranked lists of publishers of who they would prefer that candidates publish with, who they want to see those books with. I'd like to think that is going away, but I don't actually think it is. We continue to hear occasionally, not often, but occasionally from authors that have decided to go with another press because of input they got or impressions they got from their tenure committees or just senior scholars in their departments. When you're thinking about a university press versus a commercial academic press, commercial publishers may move a little faster. It depends very much on the project. They also may have or probably have more resources for marketing, but they'll also dedicate those resources to the books they expect to be more successful. They have, they want to focus more on the books that they think will have commercial success. This isn't bad. I mean, this isn't bad. It's just a different business model and something to be aware of. You want to do internet research wherever you can. The Association of University Presses is sort of our industry society or industry group, and they have a great section of their website that's dedicated to resources for authors. Part of it is about finding a publisher, and there are different things that are listed on this page. I think one of the most useful things is probably this subject area grid. This is just a section of it that I copied and pasted off the website. It actually scrolls very far to the right. And what you'll see here are subject area.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We can't see your PowerPoint. If you're
You can't see it?
No.
What happened?
Thank you.
That's so weird. At what point did you start not being able to see it? Could you ever see it?
No.
You're kidding. Oh my gosh. I am so sorry. Huh. Well,
It's good now, though.
okay. Here are those books I was talking about that are particularly socially relevant. And this is just basically what I was saying. I'll send this. I can send this slide deck actually to Mia or to Patrick if that would be useful. Okay.
That would be great if you could do that.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
Thank you.
Wow, that's so weird. I was getting and noticed that I was sharing my screen, but hey, who knows? Okay, so this is the AU Press's Finding a Publisher webpage. And this is a section on the webpage that I was talking about as I think would be particularly useful. This is the subject area grid. You'll see that there's a list of subject areas, and then across the top, the names of university presses that publish in these areas. And this goes far beyond. I mean, this is only A to the start of C. You'll see that for information and communications, for journalism and media studies, that California and Cambridge are both indicated as publishing in these areas. And there are many more that you'll see as you go through this. And this can help you, really help you target the presses that you want to look into further. So you've picked a publisher or a number of publishers, and how do you start reaching out? What's the best way to make that connection? It can be really useful to get a recommendation. It can be really useful for the press to get a recommendation from an author that we've worked with in the past, who can introduce us, over email. It's not at all necessary, but it is something that we get occasionally. We'll have one of our previous authors send an email that introduces you and makes mention of the kind of work that you're doing. In your first email, it is really helpful if you send a 1-paragraph explanation of the project, if you start with that. And put that, and also include that same paragraph at the top of your proposal. But this 1-paragraph summary is so useful. It can, just lay out your topic, the approach you've taken, who you see as the audience, and a little bit on, what's new. How have you expanded the scholarship? It's also very useful if you mention comparable books that the press has published. This isn't done all that often, but it definitely shows the editor that your work aligns with the press list and the approach, and that you've taken the time to actually look into the press before you've sent that out. You want to find the editor responsible for your discipline. Press have staff lists on their websites, and they usually indicate under the editors what areas they work in. But don't worry, if you send it to the wrong editor, they'll pass it on to the right person. And if you can, please email only one person at a press. We can get really working at cross purposes, or emails flying around if you send it to too many people. Like I said, if you send it to the wrong person, they'll pass it on. So don't send it to every editor. Some of this may seem, completely obvious, but we've seen people not do these things. Down actually to the nitty gritty, what do we look for? We've talked about some of this before, but so tenure committees care about your lit review. Readers, not so much, but they do want to see that your research framed against other scholars' work. But the lit review shouldn't be exhaustive. If you can, put it in the notes. We want to know that you're expanding the field, not just that you know the field. You want to make revisions. What's new to the book from your dissertation? Think about how you can add chapters and how you can talk about broader applications. If you can do this in an interdisciplinary way, you should. This is particularly important if you look at a press like Temple. Very few of our books, almost all of our books are cross-disciplinary. They have a primary field, but they always have a secondary field. And this is becoming more and more important. I talked before about presses moving away from narrowly focused monographs. So you definitely want to show that it is cross-disciplinary. We want a broader audience. We're looking at undergrads, upper-level undergrads. In some cases, it's important that it reads like a book, not a dissertation. If you include jargon, and don't do that, don't do too much of that. Define it well and do it multiple times. I will say that, one of the things that I always take note of when we're talking about books in our new projects meeting internally is if the author has defined, if the author has come up with a new term to define and attach to what they're doing, and they'll say, I call this X, and they put X in quotation marks. Do that sparingly. I think often authors do that unnecessarily. It's fine to use the same terms that other people have used. They're recognizable in a lot of ways, and that's a good thing. We hope that a lot of the readers are non-experts. We're going for students in a lot of cases. So you want to tell stories. You want to make your work, your words and your prose accessible. All right, now we're getting to the proposal. We've been talking about this. I've been alluding to this a lot. Tell us right away at the start of the proposal, why is this important? What's the point of this project? How did you approach it? Editors use this initial paragraph, this initial description, when they present the project to other press editors. We have a new projects meeting at Temple every Monday. It's the editorial department, it's myself, it's the director of marketing. And we go through the projects that the editors have received and decide whether we want to send them out for peer review. And this paragraph, this description is put in a cover note by the editor, and it's our first introduction to the book. So you definitely want to put this in. We also send this paragraph. This is part of our initial description of the book when the book goes to the faculty editorial board. It's used by marketing. It gives marketing an introduction to the project, and it's often not included. It's often skipped. So don't jump right into the details. An annotated table of contents is really helpful. Just a few sentences where you describe each chapter and how it fits into the book, how it connects to the previous chapter and leads into the next. This is really helpful, especially if you, and you probably won't have the entire manuscript done. This gives us the picture of what you're going to do from start to finish, where you start and where you end up. If you want the book included in a series, be specific. I think this should be obvious, but don't always assume that the editor can tell. We have a lot of series. They're distinct from each other, but even so, it is helpful if you say, I think this book is, appropriate for series X. So have sample chapters if you can. it helps if you describe, they actually show your process in a lot of ways. You know, sometimes a proposal can be enough to spark our interest, but and then we usually come back and ask for sample chapters if you don't have them. We very, very, very rarely will send only a proposal out for peer review. And we do that for senior scholars, for authors that we've worked with before. We will never do that for a first book, ever. So we will ask for sample chapters if you haven't sent them. And then we will go out for peer review. You don't have to send your entire manuscript. It's okay if you do. We do have authors who will send us their entire manuscript. I think it's important, if you're going to do that, that you indicate the most important sections, the ones you want to make sure the peer reviewers see, the ones that you want to make sure they get. And then presses have their proposal guidelines on their websites. There's usually a section on the site that's for information for authors, and they'll put up the guidelines that they have for proposals. This is NYU's. Again, every press will have them. This was under resources for the author. They are pretty much the same, but there can be some subtle differences. So definitely look for the press's guidelines for the ones that you plan to submit to. When you're writing your proposal, don't neglect including market considerations. And I say market, I also mean audience. I mean, market can have a bad connotation, but come on, we want people to buy your book. We want your book to get out there and your research to be seen. You want to be read. You know, you want to tell us who will see your book, you know, who will use your book. This is important. But you do want to be realistic. Most authors say that their book will appear to an educated portion of the general public. Confidence in your work is really important, and it's good, and it's to be commended, but most scholarly books won't be read by many members of the public. So really, really focus on those courses that will use your book. Research these courses, be specific, show how your work can be applied. You know, you want to not, you know, you don't want to just present theoretical work. If you can avoid it, we're looking for applications for sure. And we want to know about specific courses, course names, course titles, where the book could be adopted. You know, we talked a bit earlier about the differences in market focus between university presses and commercial academic presses. Commercial academic presses focus on the library market, and they are more likely to publish more theoretical titles written by scholars and intended for scholars. They do publish course adoption titles as well, but they definitely publish a lot of these academic monographs. So this is an overview, I think, of what is the typical university press publishing process. It is certainly Temple's. We talked about sending the initial proposal, what it should include, how we would like to receive it, and we talked a bit about partial versus full manuscripts. When it comes to the peer review process, we do single blind review. And I know sometimes authors of first books might find that a little surprising, but we do single blind review. There's been some movement to open peer review, although that's mostly used for open access books. Open peer review is where the authors the peer reviewers reveal themselves, their contact information is shared, and often there's a dialogue between the peer reviewers and the authors. But again, that's still mainly used for open access titles. For Temple, it's fine if you approach a series editor first before you send us a proposal. You can test the waters. You can get feedback on your work before you send us the proposal. It can help you shape your approach in a good way. That is not necessary at all. You can just tell us that you're interested in publishing your book in Series X, and we will then run the proposal by the series editor to make sure that he or she thinks it's appropriate for their series. Patrick talked about how he is on our faculty editorial board. Our board at Temple is made up of 10 faculty members, 2 of whom are deans, and these are tenured faculty. Our board meets monthly, although sometimes we skip November, and we do July by e-vote, although now all of our meetings are by Zoom. So we have been doing that. We did a Zoom meeting in July. So they meet monthly. They see the proposal, the peer reviews, and some of the chapters for each project. And they review this before discussion and voting. And the board can approve an advance contract or a full contract. So we issue advance contracts for incomplete manuscripts, ones that we only have, several chapters. For books for which we only have proposals, which those are typically books by senior scholars, as I said before, or for full manuscripts that need another round of revision and reviews, and that we'll send back out for another review, and all advance contracts go back to the board for final approval. A full contract is typically for a complete manuscript that has at least 2 reviews, and obviously positive reviews, or they may be projects for which we are competing with another press. We have done this where we only have partial manuscript, but it has very good reviews, and it's a competitive situation, and we very much want to sign the author, so we will offer a full contract. It's a gesture of our commitment and our enthusiasm for and belief in the project. We also, for books that are not scholarly, for our regional trade titles, for example, they go to the board without reviews usually, and then are signed to full contracts. I will say that our production process, I think, is fairly typical. Once the final manuscript is received, there are a number of things we go through internally. We analyze all your figures. We check that all the permissions are in place, things like that. Once acquisitions is satisfied that the manuscript is ready, and we've gone back and forth with you and crossed every T and dotted every I, we'll transmit it to production. The book then goes to a professional copy editor. The edited manuscript is sent back to the author for review. There may be author queries that need to be resolved, things like that. Once the copy editing is approved and the copy edited manuscript is final, it will go for typesetting. We have some books get custom designs. Some books go into our, we have model designs for typical books, for a typical course adoption title, for that has art, for one that has no art, for scholarly monograph, things like that. Everything is typeset. Authors see the page proofs, can return their corrections, then things proceed. The cover design is typically chosen by marketing. Marketing has a final approval on the cover design. All cover designs are shared with authors. And so authors do have input. Book goes off to be printed, printed, bound, shows up in our warehouse. While all that's happening, we're pushing out marketing information through the sales channels so that bookstores know a book is coming. The companies that typically purchase books for libraries are informed. And once the book is in the warehouse, then any pre-orders are shipped. I will say marketing and publicity can start before your book is published. We get the word out. We send every author an author questionnaire. It is fairly detailed. Please take it seriously. Fill it out. This helps us sell your book, and we want to partner with you on that. It's incredibly important that we get as much information about your book as possible so we can market it and sell it successfully. We want to get it out in the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID. Certainly things have changed. I mean, this is unprecedented and ongoing. We've all seen that conferences have gone virtual. Conferences well into the spring are continuing to announce that they're going virtual. And, you know, this really kind of changes the interaction among scholars, you know, the way people present their research, the way people can react to their research. So that's a huge change. Another big change that can impact the way that books are publicized, the way the scholarship gets out in the world, are that author talks and events are now virtual. You know, we try, and I think all publishers try, to schedule events where an author can present their book in particular ways, in particular venues. You know, maybe it's an academic talk at a other university. Maybe it's a talk at a bookstore. Maybe it's a talk at a public library. And these are now all virtual. That means we're not selling books at those talks. People aren't getting signed books from authors. We are doing more digital marketing than we did in the past. We always did digital marketing. We would do e-blasts, designed promotions to curated lists of people in the discipline and things like that. And we are doing more of that. Conference programs have gone digital, exclusively digital at this point. So we've modified our ads to include them in programs. We're doing a lot more ads that you can click through to the site to purchase the book. We're doing more promotions now with discounts and promoting and getting that word out far and wide. We're seeing a great increase in ebook sales. At the very start of the pandemic, we ran and are still running a discount on any ebook purchased on the press website, sold through our shopping cart. We've seen sales of individual ebook titles increase quite a bit, especially for a number of our course adoption titles. Temple's books are also in almost all of the ebook databases that you know. We're in the EBSCO databases, we're in the ProQuest databases. We also have a select subset of books on Project Muse and on JSTOR. We're seeing increased, these sales are royalty based, and we are seeing higher royalties coming in from these vendors than before. And certainly it's because with online courses, professors want students to be able to use the books online as well when possible. And so our sales channels have changed a bit. We're not selling direct to consumer at face-to-face events. It's been difficult with bookstores. You know, for a very long time, bookstores were closed. It's still difficult with independent bookstores. We're seeing, you know, everyone is seeing independent bookstores closing. That the pandemic has been proven more than they can weather. A lot of our regional titles have been sold through independent bookstores in the Philadelphia region. They're coming back, but we're not sure at what capacity. So we're definitely seeing some changes in our sales channels. There are other things that are basically the same for the most part. Acquisitions is still pretty much the same, with one big difference in that editors used to go to scholarly conferences and pack their calendars with appointments to meet with scholars. They would go through the program, they would identify scholars who were doing work that was relevant to the areas in which we published, that was interesting, that was groundbreaking, and they would set up appointments to meet with those scholars to learn about their work, to see if they were thinking about a book. They would meet with previous authors, series editors, face-to-face at these conferences. Now, all of that is happening over Zoom. And it's good because it's, you know, face to screen. So you're seeing the person that you're talking to, but it is definitely, definitely different. It's been effective, I have to say. It has been effective, but you do risk that, you know, that in-person touch, you feel the loss of that. Peer review has continued unabated. We are seeing some peer reviewers turning down peer review invitations. A lot of this is because, as with a lot of us, they have other demands on their time. They might have childcare. They might have kids in school, so they're basically acting like, you know, teachers on top of everything else. So they have less time to devote to things like that. We're seeing some of that with authors as well, particularly female authors. Other authors, other prospective authors, and other reviewers have more time. So the process itself is unchanged. The production process is unchanged as well. You know, before the pandemic, Temple staff most of the staff was working at home a day a week already. So we were very well set for the whole staff working from home. People were used to interacting with people who were at home. And so that's been able to continue just fine. You know, our vendors, same thing. Once printers were able to reopen, because they too were closed for a while, once they were able to reopen, things have been continuing just as they did before for the most part. Publicity, same thing. You know, the channels where things can be publicized have shifted a bit. I talked about that before in terms of events and bookstore book launches and things like that. But books are still getting reviewed. We're still getting requests for review copies. We send electronic versions if at all possible, although we can have print copies shipped from our warehouse if a reviewer wants a hard copy. Awards are still being presented. We are still submitting books for awards. I do think, though, that a lot of what made winning an award special, the sort of in-person presentation and that in-person recognition, you know, we're feeling the loss of that. Awards are still being won, but there isn't an option to actually celebrate that with the person face to face. So now I wanted to show you a new website that just launched, and it's called Ask UP. And I'm going to click to it, and hopefully it will work. In case it didn't, I took some screenshots. This is a great site. Let's see. Well, it won't work, but luckily I opened it. Okay, so Ask UP. This is a website that just launched, and as I said, you can find answers, you can ask a question, you can suggest topics that should be included. And it starts right away with what should I include in my proposal. And you can see there's information on what to include. How can I get my dissertation published? How should I approach a publisher? Really a terrific amount of useful information. Can I submit my proposal to multiple presses? We prefer that you not do that. Of course, Temple is always happy when we can get an exclusive review. This may not be possible or appropriate for your book, but I really think that this site, Ask UP, is a terrific resource. And as I said, I'll send my slides over to Mia so they can be shared, and the URL for this site is in there. So that is basically my presentation. And I hope you guys will have a lot of questions and we can have a great discussion. I've included my email address and Aaron's email address at the end. We're happy to answer questions at any time over email. So send them along. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
It was wonderful. This is time to open things up for audiences to ask questions. We've got the screen here. If you just kind of signal, and if you don't catch our eye, just open up your mic and ask a question, please. Mary Rose, if I could, this is maybe a stickier question. So when a person submits a proposal, and I guess this is a question of what not to do. It submits a proposal and gets back a response from the press and reviewers that is maybe rigorous and but also a bit maybe sticky. In other words, it's not as positive as they would hope, that is the author, but yet the press still shows interest. What is the appropriate versus inappropriate response of the author?
That's a good question. If the press still shows interest, hopefully the editor will have been clear enough on what they expect. Do they want you to revise and resubmit and basically start the whole thing over again? Or do they believe that you can write a response that will address the reviewer's concerns and this version of the book can go forward? I mean, some of this sounds obvious, but you need to entertain the reviewer's feedback seriously. The press has been careful in choosing those reviewers, based on the work that they've done, their experience, their knowledge, and we all only want to make the book better. It's important for everybody that the book be successful. So you'll be asked to respond, and you want to do that as thoroughly as you can, respond to the reviewer's points individually, and show how you're going to take those to heart. And do it sincerely, because if you come back with a revised manuscript that doesn't address the reviewer's concern and it goes back out to review and it's almost definitely going back to one of those reviewers, it again will not move forward. And, we may in fact then decline the book. It's very important that we see authors who want to partner with us. I hope that answered the question. It's also not, we very rarely have authors respond negatively to reviews. We do have authors, though, who will push back on certain points, and that's fine as long as you have justification to do that, and you can do it in a clear way that shows you've entertained it, but you have reasons to not want to do it.
Thank you. Other questions? Fab.
What would you say is the most common mistake that you see in dissertations that are turned into books?
I would say just at a really basic level, keeping your lit review. I mean, that is the most obvious thing when you see that the author hasn't put a lot of thought into taking their work forward. They're still connecting, they're still relying a lot on setting the scene. And we don't need that. Readers need a little bit of that. They want to know your work doesn't exist in a vacuum. But what we want to hear and what we want to see and what students need to see is what you've done to move that conversation forward. So still an overabundance of lit review, I think, is the most typical thing we see. And it's understandable. It's an important thing to have in your dissertation.
Dr. Murphy, you're still muted.
My apologies. How can an author work with a press? You'd mentioned in your presentation the marketing idea, the idea of the audience. What's the best way that an author can work with a press to help get the word out about their book?
Authors are, for a press our size, and we're considered a small press by the industry association that I talked about. For a press our size, the author is actually the greatest marketer there is. Certainly, tweeting about your book, sending out emails to colleagues, being willing to give talks, setting up talks yourself, going to conferences, just putting your book out there as much as you can, giving us realistic lists of journals that should review your book, places where we can advertise it, awards that we can submit it to. But, an active author is the best thing that we can have. Being interviewed in, doing podcasts, blogs, anything like that. The more active an author is and the more work they do where they actually specifically talk about their book, name drop their book, talk about their scholarship and mention that they wrote a book, the better. Really, you are the best marketer we can have, for sure. Oh, and also pointing us to lists of people who might be interested in your book, so we can do a professional marketing e-blast to them. Telling us names of courses specific names of courses. We do a lot of course research for courses that we think your book would be useful for, giving us course titles, telling us schools to look into so we can actually do that research and send out promotions. Invaluable.
Thank you. All right, I'm sure that we have some students here who have a question. They're just maybe thinking, maybe I shouldn't ask that. But this is the time that if you're thinking about it, probably 5 or 6 or 8 of your colleagues are. So jump in, please. Paige, I know you're sort of wrestling with the edge. You've got to have a question.
Well, I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit more about timeline. I'm trying to wrap up my dissertation. I'm also on the job market. Worst timing, I know, but so I'm juggling those things already, and I'm wondering, like, when should I seriously start preparing this process? How long does it take? Just a little bit more information on the timeline of that.
Sure. So once we get your proposal and your, well, first of all, please don't submit a proposal until you actually have thought about and started revising your dissertation. You know, don't submit a proposal before you've actually done any of that work. And that work can start when you have the time to do it, because you don't want to rush it. You want to have the time to devote, and the attention and the bandwidth, frankly, to spare to do a good job on that. So, you know, that can be years. You know, we got a proposal just the other day for a first book that is based on a dissertation. And it was, I think, 6 years since the dissertation was defended and the proposal showed up, which is good, you know, fine. There's no reason to worry about that part. In terms of peer review, so the proposal comes in, the editor does an initial evaluation. That may take, depending on how many things are across their desk, you know, that may take, I don't know, a month or a week for the editor to go through it and decide if they want to present the project to the internal team at the new projects meeting. We meet weekly. Based on that decision, the editor or the editorial assistant will then go and approach peer reviewers. Each book goes to 2 peer reviewers at minimum. We give the reviewers 6 weeks. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it takes about twice as long. So I would say assume, to be safe, 3 months for peer review. We certainly hope it's not 3 months, but assume 3 months for the first round of review. Based on the reviews, assuming they're positive, the book is presented at the next available faculty editorial board meeting. We want to get them, the books presented quickly. However, before we can present it, we send everything to the author and we ask for the author's response to those reviews, which we talked about before based on Patrick's question. It goes to the faculty editorial board. If the book is approved, we try to get a contract out to the author within a week. That comes, you know, that comes back, et cetera. Then the author goes back to writing the manuscript and takes into account all of the reviewers' feedback. We usually put a deadline in the contract for when the manuscript is due. It's usually, it varies, but it's usually a year. We take our cues from the author, though. If the author says, you know, a year is just not going to be enough time, I need 18 months, we'll put that deadline in the contract. So some of this is driven by you. Authors often, you know, miss that deadline. It's not a hard deadline. There's no real consequence for missing it, except that it kind of messes up our planning because we tend to attach titles to certain seasons when we expect them to be published. But again, this happens all the time, so we're used to moving things around. Once the final manuscript is sent in, everything has happened. All the final revisions are done. The board has approved it. If they, you know, if they needed to give final approval, Once that's in, it goes through the editor and the editorial department. We probably take about, I would say, a month or so to do that final painstaking review of the manuscript. It depends on if there are things missing and how the conversation back and forth with the author goes, if there are permissions still needed, if there are problems with art, things like that. But I would say it's probably a month or so after receipt of the final manuscript that the book transmits to production. We usually say from the date of transmittal to books in the warehouse is 11 months. 6 weeks of that is printing, pretty much. And the rest is for the copy editing, the typesetting, the flow of proof. It depends a little bit on the author's schedule and the balance of other projects that we might have and that our vendors might have, but we typically say 11 months from transmittal to production to books in the warehouse. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that does answer my question. I do have a follow-up though. So you were like saying that perhaps your dissertation could be sitting there for a few years. Like, is the timeliness of the subject and the data in particular not an issue then, or?
I think, I have to say that we rely on the authors to do that initial presentation to explain why that might not be an issue. Also, sometimes you're doing a lot of ethnographic research to extend the dissertation to make it more applicable. And that's more important with some areas than others. But, when we see that, that certainly has a big impact on the quality of the work we're going to get. That dissertation that we didn't get the sample chapters for 5 years, some of that was because the author was doing ethnographic research. Some of it was because she was teaching the subject and had gathered a lot more content and perspective from teaching it to change the work. So, but yes, there will be some that will have gone stale.
We have a question from Lucy March within the chat. Do university presses have the same pecking order issue that academic journals have when it comes to book publishing? And how do we avoid pressure to only pursue the best?
You mean journal publishing based on impact factor and things like that, and university presses based on prestige?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there are perceptions of prestige for sure. We've certainly had authors say that they, got a contract offer from Temple, but ended up publishing with Oxford instead because it was Oxford. So yeah, I do think that exists. I think it varies by discipline, which press is perceived at the top. I believe, even though Temple is often seen at the top in certain areas, I do believe some of this is so completely subjective as to be false. Certainly Oxford and Cambridge are talked about as being, in the higher upper echelon in general. Other presses you'll hear are much stronger in certain areas. I'd be much more convinced that certain presses that specialize in a specific discipline can be seen as more prestigious than a press that is just more prestigious because their name is Oxford. I do think it's important to see what your tenure committee thinks. It's easy for me to say, but we have heard, not often, but occasionally, that tenure committees have advised that a candidate not publish with Press X. And again, that has to do with perceptions of prestige. The impact factor is flawed in a million different ways, but it's a number at least. And you compare one number against another number. So it's concrete. insofar that it's actually a valuable number. But when it comes to a press, there aren't those sort of standard metrics. You can't compare one press against another in terms of how many copies of one book they sell, because those books are never identical. But yeah, I do think that there is a pecking order in some unfortunate ways. Again, I think you talk to your tenure committee too, and talk to colleagues. Colleagues can give you the straight information that you really need. What was your experience like when you published with X Press? How did they treat you? How long did it take? Were you invited into the process? Did you feel like you were just another book being shuffled through? That sort of thing is really important.
And I would add, and there is a pretty, I think, clear, at least in our field, distinction between the idea of prestige within a university press versus a more commercial press. And so something to keep in mind. Other questions? Well, thank you so much, Mary Rose, for joining us.
I think there's a question in the chat.
Oh, yes, thank you. Elizabeth, speaking of treatment of authors, would you advise on certain rights we should protect for ourselves?
That's an interesting question, and it gets a lot of, there's been a lot of conversation about it. So for the press, our contracts include a list of subrights that we ask you to transfer for us. But starting at the very top, you can keep your copyright for a Temple book. I have to say that that's a little bit of a it's not a meaningless right, but it's not as impactful as people tend to think it is. But we also have no problem registering the book copyright in the name of the author. We will do that. And we have a list of subrights that we ask you to transfer to us. We ask for the right to publish the book electronically. We ask for the right to do translations. We ask for the right to handle permissions for the book, for quotes or excerpts or things like that. We asked for permission to allow portions of the book to be used in courses. We asked for radio, motion picture, and television rights. On the off chance that comes up, we ask for audiobook rights. There are a couple of those that when an author pushes back and asks to retain all subrights, there are two that I think we would like to retain. That is permission to quote or excerpt from the book. If another author wants to use an excerpt from your book in their book, obviously with attribution and with permission and possibly paying a permission fee, I ask that we retain that. I also ask that we retain the right to allow portions of the book to be used in courses. These are the requests that go through the Copyright Clearance Center. If we don't retain those rights, all of those permissions, we'd have to pass on to you, and you would have to decide whether you're going to grant them and manage them. However, if an author doesn't want to grant us any subrights, we're okay with that. I do think that it's a conversation that each author sort of needs to have with themselves and with their editors, and to think about the reasons why you want to retain those rights. Certainly, we have books that do have some of the trade books, for example, or some of the books that are more focused on literature or tell a story, where the author wants to retain the radio, motion picture, and television rights. That's great. I hope they can sell them. I mean, we're not going to ever stand in the way of that. And we will allow you to keep your own copyright. We do allow authors, Temple allows authors to reuse their work in future work without permission. Like anything you wrote a chapter for your book and you want to use that chapter in a new book, that's fine. you can reuse your work without needing permission from us. So that work's already standard in our contracts. Was there a specific right that you might have been thinking about? I will say that my background has led me to be fairly, I'm very lenient when it comes to allowing authors to keep rights. I see very little chance of harm to the press's ability to sell a book around in most of these cases. And I do ask for permissions and for permissions and course use. We retain those because we know how to do it, and you do get paid a royalty on those things. But I think there was a question in the chat. I saw something pop up.
That was just, I think, Elizabeth thanking you for the response.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I do at Temple is I will advise authors if they get contracts from other presses and they're concerned about them. And if they think that, they're worried about if they're too restrictive or things like that. And like I said, I tend to be a little more permissive. So I do sometimes find things in those contracts that I suggest the author ask about, like whether they can reuse their own work.
That's great. Thanks for that question, Elizabeth. Thanks for your answer, Mary Rose. That's very helpful. Okay, well, any final questions? If not, let's thank Mary Rose for her time. Thank you so much. This was really a wonderful session. I hope that it's inspired you and that we see lots of dissertations turned into books, and you can maybe even footnote this moment where a light bulb went off or that inspiration took shape and you followed that path. Next Friday, we do not have a speaker. However, some of you may be aware, I'm going to put this in the chat, that Global Fusion Conference starts on Friday. It goes through the weekend. We have a couple of our graduate students that are going to be presenting. I've put the website address there. There's still time to get involved in that, at least as audience members, and it'll be via Zoom. So might want to take advantage of that for next Friday or weekend. You probably have nothing to do at this point of the semester, right? So anyway, it's a nice dialogue to get involved in, and so I would encourage you to check it out. Christina DeVoe next week on the 9th. I didn't have that on the schedule. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize for that. Christina, I didn't mean to, she, I think, left the session. I didn't mean to create a competitive space for you there. All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a great Friday. And
thank you so much.